Look at the size difference here. On the right is a standard German Tiger tank, a machine feared across Europe for its heavy armor. Next to it is the Landkreuzer P.1000 Ratte. It is more than 5 times larger. The origin of this massive design dates back to a 1941 strategic study by Krupp. They were analyzing new, heavily armored Soviet tanks, and the German High Command concluded they needed to scale up their own armor to compete. By June 1942, a Krupp director named Edward Grote took that directive to the extreme. He proposed a self-propelled gun so massive he called it a Landkreuzer, weighing in at an estimated 1,000 tons. Adolf Hitler had a well-documented obsession with gigantic weaponry. When Grote presented the concept, Hitler immediately approved the project and ordered Krupp to begin development. By December 1942, Krupp submitted preliminary drawings designated E304041. The military gave it a new official name, the Ratte. But looking at these blueprints raises a question. Was a 1,000-ton Landkreuzer a legitimate objective, or a physical impossibility masquerading as innovation? The first glaring physical problem was the primary armament. The design called for dual 28-centimeter naval guns, the exact type used on Scharnhorst-class battleships like the Gneisenau. A single 750-ton naval turret placed onto a tracked chassis makes the tank incredibly top-heavy. But weight was only part of the problem. These guns require a 5-story structure underneath just to house magazines, shell rooms, and heavy rotating machinery. Fitting a 5-story naval substructure into the hull of any land-based tracked vehicle defies physical and spatial logic. There simply is no room inside a tank for machinery designed to sit deep inside the hull of a warship. Because of these extreme physical constraints, some modern military historians argue the Ratte never even reached the outline design phase as a serious proposal. The physics of the turret alone strongly suggest that the P1000 drawings might be a hoax, or perhaps a speculative sketch created by a bored engineer for personal amusement. If you assume the chassis could somehow support the naval guns, you still have to figure out how to move a 1,000-ton object across a battlefield. Krupp engineers calculated they needed 16,000 horsepower to propel the Ratte. To achieve that, they proposed using 2 U-boat engines, or 8 20-cylinder marine diesel engines, identical to the ones powering fast attack E-boats. Marine diesel engines are huge and heavy. Cramming 8 of them into a steel box creates an enormous mechanical footprint. It also created an airflow problem. The engines required massive amounts of oxygen to run. To solve this, the designers planned to install submarine snorkels on the tank to feed air to the engines during land operations. The sheer volume of bizarre naval adaptations required to make the Rat move demonstrates how inherently unsuitable the concept was for land warfare. Even with 16,000 horsepower, the logistical realities of moving a 1,000-ton vehicle at an intended top speed of 40 kilometers per hour were disastrous. Driving this tank down a road was out of the question. The extreme weight concentrated across the massive steel treads would instantly crack and pulverize any paved surface, destroying the infrastructure it needed to advance. This animated diagram shows exactly how the designers intended to bypass standard infrastructure. Because no bridge could support the Rat, it used composite treads 3.6 meters wide and a full 2-meter ground clearance to ford most rivers directly. Moving it from one theater of war to another posed an even bigger problem. It was too wide for tunnels, too heavy for train cars, and had to drive itself everywhere. This meant that a single mechanical failure in the drivetrain would turn this immovable behemoth into a massive, highly visible target for Allied bombers and artillery. The massive logistical and engineering hurdles eventually caught up with the project. In early 1943, Minister of Armaments Albert Speer reviewed the E3044/1 designs. Speer recognized that a tank that destroys its own roads and cannot use bridges had zero practical military application. He canceled the project before a single prototype was manufactured. The General Inspector of Armored Troops, Heinz Guderian, later summed up the environment that allowed the Ratte to be drawn up in the first place, noting that Hitler's fantasies sometimes shift into the gigantic. The Landkreuzer P.1000 Ratte remains a symbol of an empire blinded by its own ambition. It proves that prioritizing massive scale without logistical practicality leads to failure on the drawing board.